All right, another beautiful day in Sonoma County here, and in a previous video I excavated and set the 2,000 gallon septic tank, 1,000 gallon sump tank, and the AX20 pre-treatment unit pod. And in this video I'm excited to show you how I transformed this project from this into this. All right, and to bring you up to speed on the things that I've done in preparation so far is I have backfilled on 3 sides of this sump tank, not the far side, compacted lifts. So every 8 inches or so, compacting those lifts, building that up, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to be plumbing out of the Advantex pod into an RSV splitter valve and then back into the sump tank here, and I don't want my pipe to settle, and which would eventually crack something somewhere. And I've also plumbed the inlet here and got that sealed in because this tank does not have a rubber boot. I just cut that knockout, that poly-lock knockout, real perfectly. Actually cut it a little bit and peeled it out of there, and I've pushed that 4-inch ABS Schedule 40 pipe through, and then I used some Sikaflex, which is a good product for sealing. Sikaflex 1A or the Sikaflex Pro Select here, and it's just super sticky and sticks to everything. It's a little difficult to work with, but it makes a good seal. I also went inside the tank before filling it up with water and put some Sikaflex around each one of those poly-lock knockouts on the inside of the tank, just in the event that they might leak, to have that preventative measure in place. So we are ready to start assembling everything, riser install, and then just start going to town. So let's get after it. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to be following along and commenting on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, in hopes that it helps you, potentially the new installer, or maybe even an installer that's been doing this for a while, maybe pick up on some things that might help you out on your project. So what I've done so far is I've used a little sandpaper and cleaned off the black plastic ring that was casted into the top of the tank. Sometimes there's just some concrete residue on that, and since we're epoxying to it, I just want to get it cleaned off. And I also sanded the inside of that riser just a little bit. It's really not necessary, but I do it anyways. I've mixed up that MA320 epoxy kit provided by Orenco, and I'm smearing that around. I'm going to be setting this riser on right there and checking it with the hand level. Once you set that riser down on there, you're going to want to put a glove on and smear that epoxy at that interface of the riser to that ring to get a good seal, get all those air bubbles out of there, and that's what's going to make it really watertight. So I've already installed all the risers except for the inlet side of the sump tank, and I'm about to drill through the riser for the RS3 splitter valve flange adapter. There's probably a better word for it, but that's what I just called it. So what I like to do is use that drill bit, drill through that pilot hole first, and then I'm going to go ahead and complete this hole. This hole is for the splitter valve, guys, and what has worked for me really good is to drill that hole 4 inches, the center of that hole 4 inches up from the top of the tank. That puts the bottom of that flange 2 inches above the top of the tank. So here I'm measuring down for the external splice box to drill this hole. That pilot hole I just drilled is 6 1/4 inches down from the top of the riser. And it's always good to just double check that your hole saw bit matches up with whatever you're going to install. This hole saw bit for that Orenco external splice box is a 5-inch hole saw bit. Sometimes you got to ream them out just a little bit more to get things to fit, as I'm doing there. A little bit of reaming. Yep, looking good. I'm going to go ahead and get this hole drilled out for the other splice box. So in this riser here, this is where the discharge pump is going to be going. Again, drilling that hole out for that external splice box, and the center of that hole is, again, 6 1/4 inches down from the top of the riser. Actually, in those Orenco external splice boxes, there's a little guide with those measurements for you. And again, here I'm mixing up some MA320 epoxy. And what I've done is I've drilled the 2 splice box penetrations and that RSV splitter valve penetration, and I'm mixing 1 bag of MA320 epoxy, and I'm going to use that 1 bag of epoxy to apply these 3 flanges. Otherwise you'd be wasting time and money mixing 3 separate epoxy kits to do those separate tasks right there. I just like to apply that little bead right in that groove. It's usually more than enough epoxy. And there's 4 screws that are provided with those external splice boxes that help suck that ring into the riser. There were 2 screws for the RSV splitter valve flange. I used multi-purpose glue, ABS to PVC cement, for installing these external splice boxes, and a hand level to make sure it's nice and level. And also for this, this is the stem that goes through for the splitter valve. That also is a multi-purpose glue right there. And I just pointed out that once that flange or that RSV splitter valve stem is installed through there, it puts the connection point at 4 inches above the top of the tank. All right. Just getting prepared to make this connection to the outflow of this Advantex AX20 filtration pod. It's not really so much a filter. It's a pack bed system. It's where the microorganisms are going to flourish, if you will, and those microorganisms in that semi-aerated environment are going to purify the effluent. So I'm using a mission coupler right here. I like the mission coupler when I can. I mean, it's expensive. I could use just a 3-inch PVC or ABS coupling, but that mission coupler is going to provide just a little bit of flex. You know, I really don't want the seal to be damaged. If there's any settlement whatsoever, I don't want the seal to be damaged where that stem for the splitter valve passes through the riser. PVC glue and primer for one side and ABS glue for the other. Getting it propped up, making sure we have our 1/4 inch per foot fall from the Advantex pod down. You can see I just stepped on it. That little support underneath there, I'll be replacing that with some other supports later on. Using that hand level to make sure my 90 is not turned too far down or up. It's handy. Always checking things, checking level, making sure we have our fall. And that's the UV disinfection unit. There's a light inside there, a UV light. And that's the final treatment phase of the effluent here for this system. And I screw up here. I install that upside down. You'll see me take it off here. You want that V notch on that to be pointing upwards. That's how it works. So I got it back on there. That V notch is pointing up because you'll see on that, you'll see it happen here in a second where I install that and it drops down into that V notch. And since I have all that plumbed in, I'm just going to go ahead and install this last riser. To work that stuff around really good. Work that epoxy from one side of the bag all the way to the other. And you don't want to mix it and leave it alone too long, guys. It'll harden up pretty fast. Starts getting hot. So you want to mix it and use it right away. So I'm opening up the Advantex pod and I'm pulling out the vent kit that's located inside the pod. And this is a real simple part of the project. And for me, just gluing these couple parts together, using that hand level, make sure that 90 is pointing straight up and down. Cutting one nipple to install this vent. Now this vent, you could install it 20, 30 feet away if you wanted to, somewhere else. You'd have to obviously trench and run it somewhere else, but the key point would be to make sure that that vent piping has a continual uphill slope so that if rainwater gets into it, that it doesn't make a pocket where then the Advantex pod won't be able to breathe. You want a clear passage of airflow through the Advantex pod out through that vent. So no dips in the pipe. And this unit here, this is the actual splitter valve on the inside. This is an enclosed cage. You can see that assembly there at the bottom. There's a couple floating balls inside of that assembly, and when the water level in the tank gets high enough, those balls float up and stop up the flow dropping back into the tank. I'm taking these measurements inside the tank and down to the top of that RSV splitter valve because you can adjust or cut the stinger, which is what my right hand is on right now. Sometimes you might need to adjust that stinger to be shorter, typically. But what we like to do is the top of that RSV cage down there, we want that to be roughly 4 inches below the flow line of the inlet of the tank. And that's just about the right height. Now it's time to get these Bio2 pump vaults installed. I like to take that screw out and get that Schedule 80 PVC pipe really locked in. I'm just making some marks because I'm going to cut these at an angle. I'm going to change that Sawzall blade to a finer tooth Sawzall blade. I was having some trouble with that. I'm just going to zip those guys off. So right here, the sump tank is pretty full of water, and these pump vaults will float. You really kind of have to push them down and hold them down for them to slowly fill up with a little bit of water. So that's what I was doing there, is holding that down. resetting these screws. And I'm going to make these marks and then cut these off. I like cutting them off at an angle and really trying to get it precise because it keeps that pump vault cage centered within the riser opening. And this is the recirculation pump. I believe it's a half horse pump, 115 volt, 30 gallon a minute. And I'll run that pump cord through a bottom opening, gas tight cord grip right there. And what I like to do is get the pump installed. When these assemblies come, that hose and valve assembly right there with the ball valve and stuff, you have to rework those and tighten them. Sometimes you have to take them apart and reapply thread tape and sometimes thread paste to them to get them to be watertight. But you want to get those tightened down good, but not too good. You don't want to over tighten them because you can crack some of those fittings. Like that 90 right there that Schedule 80 nipple's connected to. If you tighten that nipple in there too much, you can crack that. So don't go too crazy on the tightening. So basically, once I get that assembly put together, I can line it up on the inside of that sump tank riser right where I want it to be, and then mark the riser for my penetration. And so that's what I did. Now I'm just grinding the ribs off on the outside. I think there's actually some hole saw bits available on the market that you can drill from the outside and they take the ribs off at the same time. I never bothered to purchase those. They were pretty expensive and just never had the interest to spend that kind of money on that. But a nice tight fit is what you want. It should take a little bit of effort and force to push those pipes through those rubber grommets. All right, so now we're going to get our little stem pipe through the side of the Advantex pre-treatment pod. Notice the spray bottle, guys. You see that? You do not want to drill these things without a dust mask or without water. I mean, that stuff, it's fiberglass, so you don't want to be breathing that stuff in. So I like to use that little spray bottle when I'm drilling them out. Here's that little pipe that comes with the Advantex pod, and you just push it through that rubber grommet. That was an 1.25 inch drill bit, by the way. Setting these fabric pieces back in there and getting that, all those guys relined up. So there's a possible inlet on either side of the Advantex pod for that 1-inch PVC pressure line from the recirc pump. But in terms of the outlet of the Advantex pod, there's only one outlet, and it's that 2-inch outlet that we've already plumbed into. So you got a pressure line coming in from the recirc pump located in the outlet side of the septic tank, pressurizes that effluent in there, sprays out of the orifices, and saturates the filter pads. And that's basically, that process is just feeding the microorganisms that are growing and thriving, living in that filter media. And that's what's purifying the effluent. Sometimes I will use a torch, and I'll heat up the 1-inch PVC pipe between the Advantex pod and the sump tank, and get it nice and warm. Try not to burn the pipe, and slink it in there. For me, I feel that that's better to avoid the joints, you know, where you're gluing and putting fittings together. But on this day, our torch was out of propane, so I'm just using some 90s, some straight sections, gluing it together. I've never felt that heating the 1-inch PVC pipe based on the pressures and stuff that are occurring here in this system would bother the integrity of the PVC pipe. I'm sure if you were heating up PVC pipe that was under tremendous pressure, well, let's say over 150 psi, maybe that could be an issue, but it's never been an issue for me on these low pressure kind of systems. And again, just kind of like the fewer joints, the better. So we're installing the control panel here. I've used a 2-inch galvanized pole, or pipe actually, it's a galvanized pipe. And I've used some strut. You can see that strut at the very bottom there. That's U-bolted on. And that strut I've installed just to prevent that panel from sinking down, because that 2-inch galvanized pole is not installed all the way to the bottom of the tank hole. It's literally just in the loose backfill material around the tank. And this concrete here really for me is to help lock that pole in up against the side of the tank and prevent that pole from moving side to side or tilting back, because some of this fill on this side of the tank is going to settle a little bit. It was not compacted into place. It was jetted, but still there will be some settlement, so that concrete's going to lock that in along with that bottom strut piece that is allowing it to rest on top of the tank. Will prevent that panel from sinking down. I've seen that in the past where guys will install a post into the loose fill, and it would be a short post, and then over time the dirt settles around the tanks and it takes the post with it, and then your conduits get bent and crooked. So if I do use a PT post, a lot of the times I'll just buy a real long post, maybe a 12-foot or longer post that goes all the way to the bottom of the tank hole. And that ensures that the post isn't going to sink over time and that your conduits aren't going to get kinked. But you got to remember to get that post in before you put your backfill around the tank. Or otherwise you'll be jamming it down in there with the excavator bucket. Again here, this is the hose and valve assembly for the discharge pump. And I'm just reworking this, putting some new thread tape on there, putting some thread paste, getting things snug. And I got the whole assembly built right there. And this is what I like to do. Put it down in there, see where I need to mark and cut this standpipe coming off the top of the pump, because I want that unit to be low enough where it's not going to interfere with the lid as the lid's coming down. And so once that pump is basically installed in the pump vault, now I can mark the riser right where my penetration needs to be. This is how I like to do it. I would not drill the hole first. This has always been a lot easier for me to do it this way. And double, triple check in. Okay, drill the pilot hole first, then put that hole saw bit on there, drill that out. Have to do a little grinding, get these ribs out of the way. If you don't get the ribs out of the way, it's going to interfere with your rubber grommet. Use a little lube, some Odie. Give it a shove. It should be snug. Otherwise, it might not be watertight. We're going to give this a little finishing touch here. And our brand, Sonoma Landworks. So I just assembled this float stand, 1-inch T, and a couple pieces of 1-inch PVC piping. And setting some of these Orenco float collars on that 1-inch PVC pipe. These float collars are super handy, guys. They got a little stainless steel set screw. You can back them out, readjust them. And then the little clip hangs on to the float cord. It's not like the old days where you use that stainless steel strap and like the SJ Rhombus float clamp situation that, you know, they can get loose and they can start sliding up and down your float stand, and that's no good. Yeah, these float collars are the way to go. So I'm just lifting the filter up out of the pump vault. Allows me to kind of see what's going on. I can lift it up and down, see how the floats are doing. So these external splice boxes come with a little Velcro strap. Uses a stainless steel screw, anchors it into the top of that external splice box there. And you're going to want to definitely make sure you have that and install it there, because when you get all these cords through, you're going to want to coil them all up. It's not always super easy. It's a little bit of a challenge to get these wires coiled up neatly, but if you can, get them coiled up there, get that Velcro strap around it. And I like to add that zip tie as well. So here in Sonoma County, the regulation is to have your septic system control panel, the bottom of that panel, to be 3 feet above grade. So that's what we have there. And also that any conduit that would have high voltage in it needs to be Schedule 80 conduit above grade. I guess if it's low voltage, like in this case, there is a Cat 5 phone line coming down from the house for the monitoring here, that conduit maybe wouldn't need to be Schedule 80, but we use Schedule 80 anyways. So I'm just using some pipe clamps, some strut clamps here. Getting these conduits nice and neat. Not much to say about it other than trying to do the best job I can to keep them parallel with one another, and I'll put a few of them on and then I'll check them here eventually with the hand level. Yep, well, okay, got to adjust it a little bit. So the power's coming from the house, and the house in elevation is quite a ways up the hill. I mean, not a ton, probably 20, 30 feet in elevation higher than where these tanks are. Maybe not that much, but the distance is also pretty far, 150 plus feet. And so sometimes conduits, I don't know how, but somehow they can pick up water in a trench. And it's not a bad idea to put in a splice box. That's what we're doing here, where the conduit that's coming down from the house, as well as the communication conduit, they're going to come up into a splice box. So if any water or whatever gets into those conduits, again, that's a mystery to me, but if that does happen, that water's going to come up and out into that this Christie box we're going to set, as opposed to just going right up into the panel. There's an engineer in our area. He's very good. He likes to spec a small drilled hole in a conduit. If you're in this situation and you're not setting a pull box like that, you could drill a small hole in the side of the conduit above grade, so that any water that might accumulate in that conduit could come out and not go right up into the panel. I don't know if you saw, but I just used my knee and was able to bend that conduit a little bit. Getting the wires pulled out. And this is what I like to do. I like to get that conduit, really any pipe in this kind of a setting, to lie flat on the tanks and be as low as possible. Because when you start backfilling these tanks, if you have conduits that are suspended up high in the air, or your pressure main or anything, it's just those pipes, you're going to need to spend quite a bit of time bedding them and supporting them. Otherwise, if you just throw that backfill in loose, it's going to drag those pipes down as that dirt settles. And you could risk, a joint breaking, or, putting extra strain on the rubber grommets on the risers. So getting those conduits laid down flat is nice. And I'll tell you, I need some better hole saw bits here. I'm having to ream that hole just a little bit. Again, using that torch. So I have a little blue towel there in my hand that's wet, and what I was doing is, once you get that conduit right where you want it, I like to cool it down with a damp towel, and that helps get that pipe set in place. Checking the plans, make sure the float settings are where they need to be, and just getting these floats set up here. This is the discharge side. They wanted a float at the bottom, just above the filter. The next float up 6 inches, and the next float up 6 inches from that. So that was pretty easy. Using these zip ties here to get these cords secured where they're not going to dangle or interfere with the floats themselves. Notice that bottom float, yeah, it is touching the filter right there. But as long as when you push it down, you make sure that float is not stuck on that filter. That's the key thing. Now those floats turn on and off with very little elevation rise or drop. And so that float is really not going to be dangling down that low. If it were, the alarm would be going off and telling the control panel that there's low water level in the tank. Crescent wrench to go ahead and get those gas tight cord grips tightened up. And I'll throw a zip tie in here. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just digging a pad for the headworks assembly. It's going to be a large green plastic irrigation control box. This is some really heavy adobe kind of dirt here. It's in the summertime it really dries up and it leaves a lot of big cracks everywhere. It's not great stuff. So I've excavated this pad down low enough where we can have some room for some drain rock to go down underneath the box. This is actually a 3/8 inch double washed aggregate, so it's very free draining. But could have used 1/2 inch drain rock or 3/4 inch drain rock or even 1.5 inch drain rock. And I'm just spreading this stuff out. Getting it dialed in. But this headworks, guys, is a tricky little piece of the project, and it's going to be in my next video. So unfortunately, I'm going to be calling it here for this video today. And appreciate you guys watching. Hope you tune in for the next video on the headworks. And hope I didn't bore you to death with this voiceover. Again, appreciate you guys watching. Be safe out there. And catch you next time. Over and out.